So a lot of healing and a lot of things are going to happen in my home. And it's lifelong. They're not going to have a father.
Tonight, a family in Alberta wants to know why their father died after an alleged altercation with a hospital peace officer.
But we would hope that going forward, there would be more meaningful consultation with Indigenous nations.
4 years after the COVID-19 pandemic started, a report shows how governments fared and how Indigenous peoples could have been consulted. And who's making moves in Alaska during the Arctic Winter Games? Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. The family of Daryl Sabarin is looking for answers after the father of four died at the University of Alberta Hospital last week, after what they were told was due to a confrontation with peace officers. APTN's Chris Stewart spoke to the family.
The family of Daryl Sabarin says he was trying to get his life turned around, looking for work, trying to stop his addiction to alcohol. On March 4th, he admitted himself to the University of Alberta's hospital for detox treatment. 2 days later, he was dead. His family says they were told that the 45-year-old Dene man died after an altercation with peace officers after becoming agitated on the early morning of March 6. Shauna Gordon was Daryl's sister-in-law. She says she was told that Daryl became unresponsive after being restrained and could not be revived. She told APTN that his face had visible bruising and blood coming out of his nose. She and Daryl were co-raising his four boys.
And now I have grieving kids in my house who are crying all night. They're in therapy already. So a lot of healing and a lot of things are going to happen in my home. And it's lifelong. They're not going to have a father.
The family has gathered to remember Daryl and look at memories. Raiden is his oldest son.
In times where I felt so alone, in times where I felt like I had nobody, I always had my dad to call, you know, because I knew that he would always be there, and he would always be there to talk, lend an ear, and he always had good advice.
Jeremiah is 16 and says he is staying strong for his family.
I guess you can say I'm angry. I guess you can say I'm sad. I guess you could say I'm strong, confident in what happened. Because at the end of the day, no matter how many tears I cry, no matter how many furious moments that I have in my life that's filled with rage, at the end of the day, I'm still gonna get these things I need to get done, right? In honor of my dad.
The Edmonton Police Service are investigating the incident. Alberta Health Services told APTN in a statement that this is a tragic situation and that the Medical Examiner's Office and the university are both investigating as well. Shauna Gordon wants justice if wrongdoing is found.
So this is the second death in our family of Aboriginal people in 1 year. My brother passed away last year, June 1st, going to the hospital, dealing with mental health. He reached out for help and he died at the hospital. Now this is the second death where another brother went to the hospital for help and he died at the hospital.
Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Edmonton.
A new report is out on how government institutions fared during the COVID-19 pandemic. The report was released at a recent press conference in Ottawa. It's called Resilient Institutions: Learning from Canada's COVID-19 Pandemic. And it's co-authored by the Institute for Research on Public Policy and the Institute on Governance. Institute President Jennifer Ditchburn says Indigenous governments were involved in the COVID response, but they should have had greater involvement in all levels of emergency preparedness planning.
So what we heard at our conference last year from some Indigenous participants was often they were being invited to tables, decision-making tables, for the first time. In the context of an emergency, yes, but we would hope that going forward there would be more meaningful consultation with Indigenous nations, Indigenous leaders in these types of situations.
The government of Nunavut is repurposing an old group home in Iqaluit into a regional family wellness center for children in care. The announcement was made in the Nunavut legislature. The building is located in Iqaluit's Happy Valley neighborhood. Work on the structure starts this week. Nunavut's Minister of Family Services says there will be discussions with elders about a more culturally appropriate name for the center at a later date.
With 7 bedrooms, programming space, and office facilities, the Family Wellness Center is available and safe resource that will provide emergency foster placement for children when needed. The building will also be used to facilitate visits between children in care and their parents or guardians.
An institution that has been advocating for Indigenous storytellers telling Indigenous stories on screen received significant news today. In recent years, the Indigenous Screen Office has supported projects like Bones of Crows, Little Bird, Night Raiders, and Slashback. And while the ISO has been pushing for narrative sovereignty on the screen, its funding in the coming years was up in the air. Today, the Minister of Canadian Heritage announced $65 million over the next 5 years for the ISO and committed to permanent funding of $13 million annually.
It is making a huge contribution by enabling Indigenous peoples to share their authentic stories at home and abroad, to see themselves reflected on screen, to show off all the amazing talent of Indigenous peoples. With its unparalleled expertise, the ISO supports Indigenous creators based on their actual needs. It provided funding for the building of a film and production studio in Iqaluit, an infrastructure that will have wide-reaching benefits for the local and the creative communities in Nunavut.
First Nations University of Canada has announced the first Indigenous journalism and communication degree in North America. The new program comes in the wake of layoffs in the journalism sector, but those involved in the program say journalism is very much alive. Our reporter Rachel May has more.
We started working about 2 years ago on a new program, an expanded program, did tons of research with alum, media professionals, Indigenous media at the community level to find out what they were needing. And based on all that research, we created this new program.
Shannon Avision has been with the First Nations University of Canada since 1989 and is now an associate professor with the Indigenous Communications Arts Program, otherwise known as INCA. In the fall of 2023, the University of Regina stopped taking new journalism students. U of R journalism no longer exists, but students can still major in the subject. That opened the door for the First Nations University to move in. FNU has been running INCA since the 1980s. It's been upgraded to a full 4-year degree program. Avision says despite layoffs in the broadcasting field, the industry is very much alive and ready for fresh faces.
You know, the time is now. This is a great time for communications and journalism, even though it's changing. And we sort of wonder where it's all going to end. It's not going to end. It's going to keep on growing and expanding.
Jamin Mike is an INCA grad. He's worked with Mississippi Radio, the Canadian Press, Globe and Mail, and the Toronto Star. He now works in communications for Treaty and Aboriginal Land Stewards Association of Alberta.
I would say don't be discouraged by the amount of people who will say that journalism is dead and there's no purpose or point in the industry, because we're always going to need human beings telling real human stories.
Avision says that students can start taking courses towards the new degree beginning this September. Rachel May, APTN National News, Saskatoon.
A much needed program indeed. Our Truth in Politics panel is here to discuss the numerous recommendations coming out following the mass stabbing on the James Smith Cree Nation in 2022. That and more coming up after the break. Welcome back. There was another set of recommendations coming out of the killing spree of Miles Sanderson in 2022. Dozens of recommendations have now been made, but will they prevent similar tragedies from happening in the future? Our Truth in Politics panel is here to discuss. Negon Sinclair is a columnist with the Winnipeg Free Press, and Jennifer Leywitz is a policy analyst with War Shield. Jennifer, Negon, great to have you with us this week. Negon, we'll start with you. Dozens of recommendations have been made in recent weeks. Any of them stand out for you?
Probably the biggest recommendation is that there's so many recommendations that have come out over various months, which tells you that there's a real chronic problem within the correctional system to support particularly Indigenous offenders, but those offenders who have been traumatized over a long period of time. We are talking about someone who was convicted 46 times over about a decade, and that led to the situation, the tragedy on James Smith Cree Nation. With all of those recommendations, and I think probably the ones that relate to parole are probably the most significant ones, there's also an area involving trying to come up with a different way of defining offenders when they are in prison, making sure that they're supported in very specific ways. Because when we're talking about an Indigenous offender, we're talking about chronic offenses or abuses that they've experienced, but then also the fact that the system is really hell-bent to make sure that they are not supported in the ways in which our peoples rehabilitate and rebuild people's identity. And that involves language, culture, alongside the supports that are necessary for mental health and to make sure that trauma is dealt with appropriately. So what I would say is there's many different recommendations within that report, but I would say specifically, probably the thing most markedly is that Chief Robert Head of the Peter Chapman Band and James Smith Cree Nation came out this week and said, you know, every recommendation that comes out is really useless if we are not included in the discussions that correctional services or Canada are having, or that the justice system is having. So you have to include the community. You have to include the leadership within that community, and particularly the medicine people, the knowledge keepers, the elders, or else all of these recommendations are really just kind of lip service, as Chief Head said.
Well, Jennifer, the James Smith Cree Nation is patrolling the community themselves. They have vehicles. They have community members out there keeping an eye on things without government funding. What do you make of that?
I think it makes it really tough on the nation. You know, there's this big problem with nations with chronic underfunding and systemic barriers that they're currently trying to navigate. And you know, we saw the Ontario Chiefs have to take the government to court to get a judge to rule on a decision to give them the money that is owed to them for First Nations policing. We have heard about First Nations policing legislation supposed to be coming that hasn't been announced yet fully, so we don't know the full scope of what that's going to look like. So right now, it just seems like nations are really on their own, just trying to put in Band-Aid solutions. And, you know, you do have people with trauma or have been involved in the justice system going back to their communities, and communities have no real way of helping them, especially when there's, again, chronic underfunding for things like addiction and mental health on nations. So it just seems like it's just, you know, there's not a lot of options here. And now it's at the point where, yeah, James Smith does have their own security service. I actually have had a chance to see that for myself when I was there the day the Prime Minister came. And it's like, where's the help? Where's the support that they obviously need?
Mm-hmm. Negon, what do you think the RCMP or even levels of government think about these band members doing their work?
I don't think it really matters what the governments think about the people who, I mean, we saw during the pandemic, I think probably the best example is that when you chronically underfund a community, when you ignore the issues that are most pertinent, when you've got a life and death situation, the communities have to take upon themselves and institute policies, practices, procedures to make sure that that community is safe. And it's actually a better service, perhaps in the long run, and it might be best served if the government's to look at anything to fund these community-based organizations which are patrolling their community because they do better work. They do better work than the police officers because they are a proactive force instead of a reactive force. And so they are more vested in the interest of the life of the community, and they may be able to expand with funding beyond just patrols to be able to deal with some of the chronic issues of things that Jennifer's talking about, the things of mental health, things of family building and kinship building. All of those things would be really useful for a government to go, hey, this is a great idea. Maybe we should fund it instead of simply thinking it in opposition to us.
Jennifer, James Smith Cree Nation, obviously not alone when it comes to drug and alcohol-fueled violence. There may not be mass killings like this in other places, but there is a lot of trauma affecting communities. What are the solutions? Is this one of them?
I think, policing is the end of the road. It's essentially just trying to address the problem once it's already taken place. I think breakdown of family is one of the biggest things. We're hearing about Bill C-92, which the firm that I work for, War Shield, we're doing a ton of work on Bill C-92 with Saskatchewan communities right now. Building that engagement, talking to the youth, making sure that we're not just fixing broken families, but ensuring that families aren't breaking to begin with. Because, once your kids are removed from your care, that's where the breakdown of family starts to happen. But it's not just Bill C-92. We know the government did pass this legislation giving the autonomy back to nations, but that's just one prong of the approach. We're going to need mental health and addictions funding, and we're going to need to fund it well. And, in Saskatchewan right now, as far as I last recall, the funding available for methamphetamine addictions is 30 days. That's not enough. You need 90 days minimum. I had a sibling that went through an addiction and actually passed away in 2018. Watched it very closely. We need to be funding all of these different areas. We might not see the solutions working right away, but we will see them down the lines. And I can say that nations in Saskatchewan are taking a good lead on that and are doing everything they can to try to fix it.
Jennifer and Egon, we'll have to leave it there. Appreciate you both taking the time this week.
Great. Miigwech, thanks.
Hi.
The excitement and action continues in Alaska at the Arctic Winter Games. We'll catch you up and bring you the highlights after the break. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. Winnipeg fog seem to be a theme this week. James Moore, who I understand thinks of himself as quite the Scorsese, wanted to share what he saw. This is the view towards downtown from Provencher Bridge. Thanks, James, for sharing. If you have an awesome photo, send that picture to share@aptn.ca. Now let's look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the east coast, cloudy and 7 for Fredericton, a chance of snow, and 5 in Halifax. -4 with flurries for Kuujjuaq and Nain. +12 in Montreal, 2 above with snow for Val-d'Or. 4 in Sault Ste. Marie, flurries and 5 in North Bay. 10 above and cloudy for Thunder Bay, snow and 2 for Sioux Lookout. +2 for God's Lake and Thompson, 4 with snow in Norway House. Flurries and 3 in Winnipeg, 4 above in Dauphin. +8 for Regina, +4 for Saskatoon. Sunny and 7 in Meadow Lake, 3 in La Ronge. In northern Alberta, +1 for High Level, 4 above and snow for Fort Chipewyan. 10 in Edmonton, 14 above for Lethbridge and Calgary. Sunny and 12 in Vancouver, 17 above for Kamloops. 14 in Prince George, 10 in Smithers. -20 and snow in Old Crow, 0 with flurries in Whitehorse. -4 and snow in Yellowknife, -17 with snow in Norman Wells. 28 below in Sax Harbor, -24 for Pawlatuck. -14 with snow in Chesterfield, 28 below and snow in Cambridge Bay. -19 in Resolute, 12 below with snow in Iqaluit. The competition is fierce as more medals are handed out in the Arctic Winter Games. Host Team Alaska leads the medal race with 109 medals, also known as Ulus. Our reporter Charlotte Moore-Jacobs brings you more.
On the snow, they earned gold for the 400-meter relay snowshoe. And it was an impressive day in Arctic sports as Team Alaska took home 12 Ulus total in arm pull, Alaskan high kick, and knuckle hop. Longtime Arctic sports coach from Team Nunavut, Tommy Bruce, says the crowd here is enthusiastic.
It used to be, you had to be quite quiet, like you could almost hear a pin drop in the gym. Mm-hmm. The Arctic sport when they're doing the 2-foot high kick or Alaskan high kick or whatnot. So But today, the younger generation, they like to hype up the crowd and get energy from that and just give them an extra little bit of energy, I think, to make that height that they couldn't really hit. And then some of them have missed. And then with all the noise that they requested, that they hit the target.
While Nunavut has some catching up to do in the overall standings, they are doing well in Arctic sports, largely due to the resurgence of the game.
In our Kivalliq region, we used to have summer games where we had all the Arctic sports. Like, it would be a great idea if the Arctic sport program package type deal gets taught at high school, or each school starts a club that will ensure that there's like practice and discipline and all those kind of things that will get Arctic sports like up there again.
Team Yukon is in second place with 77 ulus. They shone bright in the first ever Open Female Dene Games category, edging out Team Nunavik to earn them a gold ulu, while their teammates loudly played their drums.
Music and it's just really fun. Like, I don't know. Yeah, it's just fun.
Yeah, I think the drumming really helps get our energy up. And just everyone supporting everyone, cheering.
They hope their win inspires other women to join.
Do it. I would say take the opportunity. It's a great experience. Yeah, you won't regret it.
And lastly, it's shaping up to be a two-horse race for overall bronze in medal standings. Team Alberta North jumped a standing over Team Northwest Territories yesterday, bringing them in third place with 46 ulus total. They earned gold in female gymnastics, team competition, as well as figure skating, short program levels 1, 2, and 3. But the games aren't all about sports. There's been traditional demonstrations every day, and tonight there will be a cultural gala with delegates performing to a sold-out crowd. The 2024 Arctic Winter Games, which open Sunday, continue until Saturday in Matsu, Alaska. Charlotte Moore-Jacobs, APTN National News, Yellowknife.
Did you catch the knuckle hop there? Just one more reason the Arctic Winter Games are so great. Time to head over to our Ottawa studio now, where Annette Francis is standing by with a look at tonight's episode of Nation to Nation.
Coming up after the news on Nation to Nation, an investment of over $2 million for Indigenous-led justice services was announced this week. The goal is to address the overrepresentation of Indigenous people in the justice system.
The people that we're serving is very significant because we're able to provide those services that some mainstream systems cannot address.
And a new document to help identify legitimate Indigenous businesses across the country has been released.
There's a lot of false groups and organizations across the country, and by the way, across the world. This is a global issue. That are claiming that they're Indigenous.
A well-known Indigenous organization has had to deal with closed doors and empty halls when it comes to the federal government. That's coming up in just a few minutes.
Thanks, Annette. Some big stories over there. You can catch Nation to Nation right here in less than 2 minutes' time. That's all the time we have for your APTN National News tonight. We're going to do the knuckle hop around here. For news anytime, head over to our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Dennis Ward, Marcy McGuitch. Thanks for being with us. Have a great night.